Alrighty, here we go. Hello, everybody. Looks like we got a handful of people hanging out here today. Not sure how many. 33 of us. Happy America Day to anybody in America. And let's get started, I guess. So the last time that I was streaming, I think we were working on some more front-endy stuff. And I think we've kind of got pretty far with this stuff now. I feel pretty good about what we have here. There's some stuff I still want to do regarding like client-side error handling and stuff. But before we can do that, I think we need to finish wiring up the back end so we can start kind of testing out the real flow with the UI. So there's a couple things that we need to do. Let's take a look at what code we have right now. So right now we got this kind of big gnarly controller method that we hit whenever someone actually tries to basically complete their purchase. So say they, select 2 episodes, enter their stuff, hit pay. It ends up hitting this endpoint with a bunch of stuff. And we have like really good test coverage for all this stuff, I think. So you can see when we run the tests, everything is fine. Let's make sure that we got, actually, you know what? We don't need to run our JavaScript watcher for what we're going to be doing here. So all the tests are passing, but if you look at this code, it's a bit of a long controller action. The parts are all kind of there that I think a controller should be doing. It kind of fetches the initial resource that we're working with in this case, does some request validation, and then, returns a response. But all this stuff in between, I kind of think we can simplify this a little bit, or maybe find a way to sort of tuck this into some other abstraction. So, and there's a couple other refactorings that I want to do too. So maybe we'll start with something simple. So a simpler one is we had this kind of custom validation rule for making sure that all of the slots that someone was trying to sponsor were unique, so they weren't double paying for the same slot. And I really was totally shocked that there wasn't something built into Laravel for this and that we had to write a custom one. But it turns out there is something built into Laravel for this, and we just couldn't find it because I didn't know what keyword to look for in the validation docs. So there's a rule called distinct where you can make sure that all of the different items are unique amongst each other. So I'll show you how it kind of works. So you might think that we could just like get rid of this rule, add distinct here, and then run our tests again and expect that everything works. But it doesn't work. And the reason that it doesn't work is because distinct is actually not meant to be applied to the top level array, which personally I found that kind of surprising. You're actually meant to apply it to like sponsorable slots dot star. So we have to say like each one is supposed to be distinct, not that the actual top level item contains only distinct items. But even if we make this change, you'll see that it still fails. So let's head over to the test. Here's the test where we're checking to see that sponsorable slots are unique. I'm going to just dump the response. Is there a way to just render like the JSON from it? I don't know. Let's just see what happens. Is that a method? Perfect. Just guessed. So you can see that we actually get errors back saying that the payment token field is required and that sponsorable slots 0 must be distinct and sponsorable slots 1 must be distinct. So we got a couple things to fix here. The first one actually is that we shouldn't be passing through a null payment token. Since the payment token is required, I think we should be passing through a valid payment token. So let's make sure that we do that. So if we head up here, you can see we pass through valid test token. So basically everywhere where we have null except for a payment token is required, I think we should make sure that we're passing through a valid payment token. Otherwise the tests might be failing for the wrong reason. So let's make sure that we update those. And this one's okay, and this one's okay. And now instead of making sure that, where's the unique one? Unique. Instead of checking for an error on sponsorable slots as a whole, let's check it on each one individually. So we're going to want to check .0 and .1 since we're passing through 2 here. So yes, looks like someone's complaining about the stream quality. I wonder if that's a problem for everyone or just for one person. I've been having some sort of shitty internet problems lately, but it looks like it's okay streaming through to my screen. So I'm just going to assume that it's all right for everyone for the most part. Okay, so let's run this test. So this test passes now. The whole suite passes. And I think we can actually even get rid of this bail rule now, because the only reason we had the bail rule was so that our custom validation rule didn't run. So let's ditch that and run this again. Okay, so all the tests are green, and we're able to kind of refactor from our kind of custom validation rule to a Laravel specific one. Now, I will say part of me is still kind of interested in the idea of being able to do this check against the top level key. Which is maybe still a good reason to have a custom validation rule at some point. But for now, I think it probably makes more sense to just leverage what Laravel does for me out of the box. So why don't we go ahead and commit this. So these changes, I think we'll kind of do these in 2 steps. Let's commit all the payment token stuff first. So we'll just say pass valid payment token when testing other validation rules. And then in this commit, we'll say refactor custom validation, refactor from custom validation rule to built-in distinct rule, something like that. Okay, so tests are all green. Might as well push that up. And now we can talk about this refactoring that I want to do here. So let's take a look at what we got. So basically we take the sponsorable, which in this case is like the podcast, right? So full stack radio is the sponsorable. We try to find all of the slots that the person is trying to sponsor, which we get from the request. So in this case, it might be, you know, episode 99 and episode 100. And then we charge the payment gateway directly, passing through the email address of the customer who's trying to purchase, the price, which is just the total, you know, of the 2 slots, individual prices, their payment token, and then a description of the charge. And then after that, we actually create a sponsorship, which is like a sponsorship record in our database. And we update each one of the slots to mark them as basically being sponsored. So what I'd like to do is try and wrap all of this stuff up into another class, something that we can kind of tuck this behavior away in. I don't know when sponsorship will be finished. I don't really have any plans for it to be like finished, as in never work on it again. I think it's a useful app that I need for my own purposes for managing the podcast. I think there'll probably always be features to add. So for now, I'm just going to keep working on it and adding new stuff while we're doing these streams because it's kind of fun and people seem to enjoy it. In terms of when do I think I'll be able to like at least deploy it, we're getting pretty close. The only things that are kind of left to do is some of this cleanup on the back end, integrating correctly with Stripe, and then the client-side error handling. And I think that'll be enough to be able to actually deploy it and start using it. It'll be really, really simple. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to use it for my own sponsors, at least from that point on. Okay, so how are we going to hide this stuff away? So a lot of people would maybe try and come up with like a service class or something like that. Personally, I kind of don't really love just trying to create a new class for some, you know, piece of work without being able to identify like a noun that I'm actually working with. I always want to be able to figure out like where can I put this code? Like what's the thing that I'm trying to do and where does that belong? I think it's kind of cheating to say like we have like a sponsorship purchasing service or something. It feels like a cop-out. It feels like not actually working your creative muscles and trying to find out what the real abstraction is or the real concept is in the system. So something that I've used in other systems that was kind of an abstraction that took me a while to kind of figure out that has seemed to work well in other applications too is this idea of a checkout object. So when someone's trying to purchase some slots that they want to sponsor, what we are really sort of doing is we're like creating this new checkout, and a checkout is, represents them wanting to purchase something and the things that they want to purchase. And then we can complete that checkout by actually processing their payment. So complete is sort of the verb, the thing that we're trying to do, and the checkout is the thing that we're trying to do it with. So what I'm kind of hoping is that we'll be able to refactor this to be able to do something like, checkout equals new checkout. And this won't be like an eloquent model or anything. It'll just be like a plain old PHP class. And this will take some dependencies, right? So let's think about like what's involved in the checkout. It's the person who's trying to purchase, right? So the email address and maybe the company name. So the email of the person purchasing and kind of some metadata about that person. And then there's also the slots that they're trying to purchase, right? So that's kind of like the other parameter here. So this kind of encapsulates all the pieces of the sort of pending purchase, right? So it's a person, which is kind of like these two things, and maybe we can even create an abstraction around that, and then the slots that they're trying to purchase. And then once we have this checkout, we can try and basically complete this checkout. So we can call a complete method on the checkout, and we have to figure out, okay, well, what do we need to complete a checkout? Well, we need the payment gateway, right? So we can pass the payment gateway through because we're going to need to use that to complete the checkout. And then there's probably at least a couple other things that we're going to need to do, right? So I think probably in this case, the most important one is the payment token. And then if you look here we have like the description, like the statement descriptor or the description of the charge that's going to show up in Stripe or whatever. I don't think we actually need to pass this through as a parameter because I think this could be something that the checkout is responsible for. This could be like a detail that we encapsulate inside the checkout for now. So why don't we comment this stuff out and try and implement this as a refactoring. So basically we'll just keep making sure the tests are passing as we sort of try and move some code around. So to start, I'm going to make a new class called checkout. And I always use artisan make model to create new classes because it scaffolds out the namespace and stuff like that. So even though this isn't going to be an eloquent model, I usually generate them this way. And then I just edit this stuff. Maybe I should make my own package for just like creating a class with a namespace. So we'll have a checkout. Let's just run the tests. Okay, tests are still green, so it's fine for us to create a checkout. So we're going to say that the checkout needs to accept an email, a company name, and some slots, right? So why don't we add those three dependencies? So we'll have an email, company name, and then the slots. All right, so let's run the tests again. Tests are still green. So checkout is going to need to have a complete method. So let's add a complete method. So complete, which takes a payment gateway and a payment token. So we'll take the payment gateway and the payment token. And that doesn't need to do anything yet. But let's just run the test. So the tests are still green. Cool. So now we can try and move some code around. So let's uncomment this, run the tests. Okay, so we got an error here. What's the error? Class controls checkout is not defined. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to comment this out. If we're trying to do like really strict TDD, you don't want to make changes when things are broken. You want the test to stay green the whole time during a refactoring. If the tests ever go red during a refactoring, the sort of super strict TDD way to handle that is to back out the changes and then figure out a way to introduce the changes without breaking the tests. Okay, so we're back to green. So what do we have to do to make it possible to uncomment this line basically without introducing a failure? In this case, it's just as simple as making sure that we import the checkout, right? So let's import the checkout first, run the tests, tests are still green, uncomment this line, run the tests, tests are still green. Okay, so the next thing that we want to be able to do is we want to be able to uncomment, ideally basically, we want to be able to uncomment checkout complete, comment out all this stuff and have everything work. Now, of course, it's not working, so we got to figure out what changes we got to make that possible. So why don't we start by moving this logic into the checkout? So I'm going to copy these lines, and then I'm going to paste it into complete. And we're not going to use this payment gateway. We're just going to be using payment gateway. And request email is going to become this email. Slot sum price is going to become this slot sum price. This is going to become this. This is just going to be payment token. And then this description. This one's interesting actually because we need the sponsorable to be able to do this. Okay. So that means that a checkout is going to need the sponsorable too. So let's pass through the sponsorable, update the signature here so we have the sponsorable as well. And then down here we can say this sponsorable. Okay, so we haven't actually swapped anything out, so hopefully tests are still green. So now let's try and basically swap this code out for this code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this top line, and for now we're going to have the checkout complete method return the charge, even though this isn't necessarily what we need because eventually we're going to move some other stuff too, but let's just kind of see. So instead of charge equals payment gateway charge, let's just return what we're doing here and run the tests. Okay, so we're still green. So that means we can delete this code now. I do still need to pass the slots because I need to know which slots the checkout is for, right? So I would either have to pass the slots or I would have to pass the IDs from the request and have the checkout fetch those. So it seems to be just like one, you got to choose between one or the other. Maybe we can simplify it though over time. Let's just kind of move slow here. Okay, so now that we've got the charge, we kind of got things working. Let's move some more code into complete. So instead of the sponsorship getting created out in the controller, why don't we have the sponsorship get created as part of doing this complete stuff? So we'll set charge as a temporary variable here, which is not my favorite thing to do, but it'll be okay for now. And let's return the sponsorship instead of the charge. And now we'll say sponsorship equals checkout complete. And now we can comment this out. And let's see what happens now. Okay, so we got an error. So the error is undefined variable sponsorship on line 35 in checkout. Oh yeah, duh. So we can just return this. Okay, let's just see if we're green. Okay, so we're still green. All right, so that means we can delete this code. So the next step is updating each one of the slots so that the slot is marked with being sponsored by that sponsorship. So let's copy this line and paste it into here. And we'll have to assign sponsorship to a temp variable to be able to do this for now. And then we'll return it here. It's really gross. And then if we comment it out here, now we're getting an error. Undefined variable slots. So that has to be this slots. Okay, so now we're back to green, which means we can delete this code. And I kind of think it makes sense that the sponsorship is what gets returned when you complete a checkout. So I kind of feel comfortable leaving that. So is there anything that we can do to clean up this code at all? I mean, let's think. It's probably not worth it, but we could do like return tap sponsorship create to get the sponsorship here so that we can do a little bit of work with it. I would probably do this personally, but it's not necessary really. And then the nice thing about this is that it means that we don't actually need a sponsorship temporary variable. Like we structured a code in a way that that's not necessary. So this is a thing that we want to return, but before we return it, we want to do some work that depends on being able to access it. Now, if we also wanted to, right, we could inline this whole call here. basically do all of the payment gateway charging directly in line, and that should still work. But personally, that seems like not really worth it. I don't love temporary variables, but I don't mind having them if it's for readability. I think temporary variables can be a smell if you have to create them to sort of like back up a value because you need it in multiple places. In this case, the fact that we could inline this if we wanted to tells me that like our code is structured in sort of a clean, non kind of complected way. So I think this is probably okay. If we wanted to, we could move this out to like a helper method or something, like a private method in here to actually create the charge, but I think this is probably fine for now. Request calls need to be replaced. Oh yeah, good call. Okay, so let's replace this with this email and this company name. Cool. All right. So that's looking pretty decent, I think. Like it's cleaned the controller up quite a bit compared to what we had before. Yeah. So the one thing that is kind of junky that I'm not sure what the best solution for is the fact that we have to pass through the sponsorable and the slots. Like something kind of feels a little bit weird or messy about that. Like we're passing this through just to be able to get the name of it for the description. You know, if we really wanted to, we could get the description from the slot because there's obviously a relationship that goes in the other direction. But that kind of seems gross too, because basically the code to get this would basically be like slots first sponsorable name, and then you kind of have this like built-in assumption in here that every slot that comes in belongs to the same sponsorable, which it does in this case, but it might not forever. And yeah, it's kind of a little bit clunky. So I think it's nice to pass it in explicitly in this case, although it kind of feels gross. I almost wish there was we could do this. There is a way to do this. We could make a custom eloquent collection for slots that we could add additional methods to. So it would be kind of like a decorator around like the real collection, but maybe not worth it at this point. The font is Menlo, just like the most boring Mac font ever. I think it might even be the default Sublime font. I've never changed it. The theme is the material theme, but I've customized it to be a lot higher contrast, so it's a darker background color. Just because when I record screencast or stream, it seems like the colors get a little bit washed out in the recording. So I try to increase the contrast a little bit more so it's a little bit easier to read in the actual recording. Okay, so, that seems all right. That's a bit of an improvement. The other option, this isn't totally necessary, but something that we kind of talked about is like these two parameters are kind of, they're kind of like what you would call like a data clump if you're talking about code smells. In this case, like, we only use them once, so it's not really clear that they're a data clump, but they're kind of two things that like always need to go together, right? They're kind of like attached. We would never pass this email with a different company name or this company name with a different email. These are really just two pieces of data that represent like the customer who's trying to purchase this stuff. So something that I've done in the past for this sort of thing, that we could do here if we wanted to, which it's not really going to buy us a lot in this case, but it's an interesting idea anyways, is to have like another kind of plain old PHP object. So we could do something like new customer, and a customer is an object that has, an email and a request, or an email and a company name. And that way in here, instead of passing through email, company name, slot, sponsorable, instead of having 4 constructor arguments, we would basically just have the customer, the slots that they want to purchase, and the sponsorable. And then down here, instead of this email and this company name, this would become basically this customer email. So it's a little bit of indirection, maybe. It might not be worth it, but it is something that we may want to move to down the road if things get any more complicated than they already are. So I think that's probably enough refactoring in this case for now. This is still unfortunate, but you know, I can't think of a really clean alternative to that. I mean, like one option is to make the sponsorable sort of responsible for creating the checkout. This is like another thing that I do a lot of the time when I'm kind of like refactoring code or trying to structure code. Is not that there's anything wrong with the new keyword, but sometimes I wonder, like, should creating this be the responsibility of something that I already have? So we could do something like, you know, sponsorable purchase, you know, and we could do the slots, and then we could do the customer. And this could return the checkout, you know, so the checkout constructor would stay the same, but it would kind of like make it a little bit more explicit that the checkout is kind of generated from the sponsorable. And that would simplify things like a little bit from this perspective, but not really significantly. Florian says, or make sponsorable or responsible for knowing which slots were selected. I'm not sure what you mean there. Do you mean like we still need to pass request sponsorable slots into something to get to be able to make sure that we're checking out for the right slots? So I don't know. I think like things are going to continue to change here anyways, because there's some other edge casey problems that we might want to tackle at some point. Like basically the main one is just kind of like a race condition potential here. So someone could try to basically purchase these slots. This sort of acts as a check to make sure that no one else has purchased them. But in the time that it takes to talk to Stripe, you know, someone else could have tried to purchase the same ones a split second before you, and this setup might allow two people to purchase them, which is not ideal. Very rare. Odds of that happening are basically zero for my podcast, but it's something that we might have to do at some point. Sponsorable selected slots. Yes, the thing I don't like about, so if we made the sponsorable, or like if the sponsorable somehow had a method, you know, like slots equals sponsorable selected slots, somehow the state has to get set somewhere, right? Which feels kind of weird to me. I don't think like a sponsorable should always have the concept of selected slots. To be able to do that, this has to be sort of like mutable and have multiple potential states or whatever, or like sort of represent a slice in time and not just like the resource. So I would almost think like you would want to do something like sponsorable, like select slots or something. And I already don't really like this. And this would be like request sponsorable slots. And then you'd almost have this return like a selected slot collection or something. And like, you know, this would have a method like to get the sponsorable that the slots are for. Or you could even make this responsible for generating this entire string here, because it's the thing that holds on to that information. So I don't know, a couple of different things we could do, but I think for now, as long as our tests are green, this is an improvement over what we had. We have this kind of new concept of a checkout, so I think I'm cool with it. So to get the episodes, are using an API. No, the episodes are just in the database seeded. Okay, let's commit this stuff too. So let's refactor purchasing logic to use new checkout object. Okay, so a couple other things we need to do. Something that we kind of messed up actually originally was that we didn't take into account the fact that these purchases have to go to a specific person's Stripe account. So I'm not setting this up where like we just have one central Stripe account and all the sponsorship money goes into that, and then I somehow disperse that to the owners of the podcast or whatever. The way I want this app to work is someone comes in and they like OAuth with Stripe to connect their Stripe account, and whenever someone sponsors their podcast, that money just goes directly to them. We don't take like a cut or anything. They're just going to pay like a monthly fee. So right now, when we go to complete the checkout, we pass through a payment gateway and we pass through the payment token, which is the token generated on the client side by Stripe Elements. But we don't pass in like a destination like account. You know what I mean? Like there should be like a destination account ID or something here. So in our case, I don't want to start with Stripe Connect right off the bat because I want to be able to deploy this sooner than instead of being forced to integrate all that OAuth stuff. So I came up with another idea, which was basically that if you look at in Stripe's sort of developer API keys stuff, there's your publishable key, right? Which is, first of all, these are test keys, so it doesn't even matter. But this is the key that you would use to initialize Stripe's JavaScript. And then you can create like your own custom keys, right? So if we just said, okay, we want someone to be able to have read and write access to all core resources, and this will be like my sponsorship key, for example. And then I need to put in my password, which no one should be able to see, hopefully. So that should be no problem. We're just in dev mode anyways, but yeah, so that now we can get like a dedicated API key, right? So what I kind of think I want to do for like the first version of this is expect that customers have to basically enter in their Stripe API key, which can just be a restricted key. Like it doesn't have to be their main key. It can be a revocable key. And then once we have this, we can sort of pass this through to the checkout so that we know when we're making the calls with Stripe to authenticate using a specific token or a specific API key. Yeah, you could split payments with Stripe, but I don't think that's, I don't know, as a potential customer, I wouldn't want to do that. I would just rather pay like $25 a month or something and, you know, not worry about splitting that stuff, because otherwise people are tempted to be like, okay, well, instead of paying 10%, why don't I just invoice them manually and get to keep all the money, you know? So anyways, the idea is that someone's going to create this token and they're going to give us that, so we store it in the database on their account, and then we'll kind of use that. So what I want to be able to do here to kind of get this working, we need to basically figure out how to make sure that when a purchase happens, it gets associated with the right account. So let's think about how we're going to do that. I think the first step is to add some tests for our fake payment gateway. So right now our fake payment gateway lets us charge with an email address, an amount, a charge token, and then a description, right? I think we're going to want to update this signature, even though it's going to get gross with 5 friggin' parameters, but you know, it's fine. I can live with it. We'll add an API key parameter that specifies basically which account that we're going to be sending with. And that's going to change eventually to just a destination account ID, but for now it'll be okay. So here we have a test for retrieving charges, right? So we create a fake payment gateway. We do 3 charges. We make sure that there's 3 charges, and we make sure that we can get all the charges back. So I think what we should do is make sure that retrieving charges for specific keys. We'll rework this test to make it possible for us to kind of do, you know, what we need to do here. So I think I'm going to change the signature of this a little bit. So let's copy this stuff and cut it. We'll move that to the end, and then we'll move the API key to the end too. So here we'll just do like test key, and we'll just say, maybe we'll have 2 test key ABC and 1 test key DEF or something. So let's change this to payment gateway charges 4, and we'll have this accept the key that was used. And we'll make sure this is 2. So we'll just say like, we'll call this like ABC charges. And then we'll also have DEF charges, I guess. These are stupid names, but it's fine. I don't want to pass the key to the constructor because the object is already going to be instantiated when it hits the controller. So unless we had like a payment gateway factory that we passed in, and then we passed the API key to the constructor, you know, but that seems like just another layer of indirection that just doesn't seem necessary. We could even pass through like a function to build us a payment gateway. But again, for now, let's just keep it simple and just have a longer parameter list, which again, that's not the nicest thing in the world, but I think it's a good place to start. So let's just comment this stuff out for a second and run just this test. I'm going to turn off my fridge because it's making annoying noises. Let's run this test and see what we get. So payment failed exception, not exactly the nicest thing. So let's just go through and rework this signature. So it's going to be email, amount, description, token, and then like API key, right? Let's just see if that helps. Okay, call the undefined method charges for. Okay, so instead of getting all the charges, let's get the charges for an API key and see what happens. Okay, so if undefined variable charges, so this is going to have to be ABC charges, and this is going to have to be DEF charges. Let's change this. Let's say test key account A, test key account B. So we'll say account A charges. This is kind of gross. I hate when you have a single letter. Account B charges. Okay, so we'll change this. Account A. Mixed case, but I think it's fine with me. Should have changed all these at once. Okay. So failed asserting the actual size 3 matches expected size 2. Okay, so this fake payment gateway, instead of returning all the charges, we're going to want to return just the charges for that specific API key, right? So there's a couple ways that we could do that. Right now we're pushing charges, all charges onto the same array. We just have like a single collection. So we could either keep doing that and store the API key that the charge was for with the charge. You know, that's one way to do it. But another way is to actually just categorize the charges when we store them on. So let's think about what the easiest way to do that is. It's kind of tricky because I kind of hate when you have this situation where basically what I want to be able to do, right, is I want to be able to return charges at this API key, you know, or charges get API key defaults to basically an empty collection or whatever, right? So like new collection. But we need to have that key exist, which is always kind of a bummer because we don't want to have to do this sort of thing. So you've probably written code like this before, like if this charges has, or if not, this charges has API key, which means we have to use the API key here. Then we want to say this charges API key equals new collection. And then here we want to say this charges at API key push the charge, so that they're kind of categorized. Like maybe we'll just roll with this for now, but I'm curious to explore the collection API and see if there's like a more declarative way to just put this at a path and have it create the path for you. So let's just kind of see. Okay, so we got a syntax error. Probably a bracket problem, semicolon problem, writing too much JavaScript lately. Too few arguments to something. Fake payment gateway 29. Where am I making this mistake? Oh. Yep, duh, this is a use. Okay. All right, so that's green. Let's look at the collection for a second. Is there a put? Put an item in the collection by key. So I can think of a way to do this, but I don't love it. Let's see, is there like a clever way to do this? I'll show you what I'm thinking, which is probably unnecessarily clever. We could do this, charges, put, and then the key is going to be API key. And at that API key, we basically want to put what is already at the API key. So we could say get API key or new collection by default. And we want to push an item onto the end of that. Now, I'm not sure if push returns the collection or not. It does. Okay. So this charges get API key new collection push charge. So that's like the one-liner way to write that, I think. Yeah. What does key by do? I don't think that's what we want to do. That changes the keys, unless I'm misunderstanding. So anyways, this is the clever non-conditional way to do it. So at that API key, we want to put either what's already at that API key with the new charge at the end, or if this returns null, then we want it to return a default collection and push the charge to the end. All right, so is it too clever? Yes. Am I going to keep it? Yes. Okay, so we got a bunch of failing tests, but that's okay. That's because we changed a bunch of other stuff. So we're just going to have to go back and fix that later. Okay, so let's pull this up again. And let's just change this to like account A charges. And we'll change this to account B charges. Undefined offset 2, so this will actually be 0 because we're looking at the first one. Okay. Okay, green. Charges require a valid payment token. This is going to fail too because we changed the API signature. Let's say invalid payment token, and we'll just say, what do we call these up here? Test key account A. Let's say test key A account A. Oh, we'll just say test key. Test API key. Whatever. Don't care. Okay, call the undefined method charges. So in this case, instead of getting charges, we'll get charges for test API key. And that should be enough to kind of do what we need to do here. So let's run this whole file. The file's good, but I think the whole suite is going to be messed up. And I think that's only because we need to change what's happening inside the checkout class. So instead of calling this way, we're going to need to make sure that we do something like move the description first, that afterwards, API key. So this is gross, but it's fine. So we'll have payment token and API key. Then in the sponsorable sponsorships controller, when we complete the checkout, we're going to want to pass through the API key, which I think for now what we'll do is we'll get that from the sponsorable, but I think this might live on the user eventually. But I can say that based on my own needs, I wouldn't mind being able to specify a different Stripe account like per podcast. You know what I mean? So I can keep all that stuff separate. So it might make sense to keep this stuff separate that way. So you know what? Let's just move it directly onto the sponsorable for now. And you know what? I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So let's undo our changes to the checkout for a second and fix this from the purchase sponsorship test. So here's like an example where we're purchasing available sponsorship slots. If we can get this test passing, I think we'll be able to get all of them passing. So let's just start by trying to fix the errors. So 2 fee arguments passed to charge. So in the checkout, let's make sure that we pass all the arguments to charge. And the missing argument is the API key, right? So let's just assume that it exists, which it doesn't. So now we're getting an error that there is an undefined variable API key. Okay, well, we expect that someone passes us the API key. So let's add that as an argument. Now we're going to get an error that we didn't pass enough arguments. Yep, 2 fee arguments to complete. So let's head back to this controller, and here what we're calling complete, let's pass through the API key. And we're expecting to get this from the sponsorable, right? So let's run this test again. It's probably going to be null, and so it's going to mess up in some weird way. So now we're trying to call charges. We don't want to call charges here. We want to call charges for. So let's get the charges for a specific API key. So how are we going to, what API key is it going to be, right? So we can say like test API key or something. Let's run this. So now we're going to see failed starting at actual size 0 matched expected size 1. Okay, so now we get a real error. So let's head up to here, and basically we want to say, okay, well, when we create the sponsorable, we're going to need to make sure that we specify like the API key for the sponsorable. So it makes me question the name because it's kind of like too generic. So maybe we'll just call it like Stripe API key explicitly. We're kind of coupling ourselves to like Stripe as a payment gateway, but I think I'm okay with that for now. So let's just make this test API key. This is going to fail still, so it has no table column. So let's create sponsораbles table, and after the slug, let's add the Stripe API key. So let's run this again. So now we get an error, failed starting the actual size 0 matched expected size 1. And that is because here we're passing through API key instead of Stripe API key. Okay, so now undefined method payment gateway charges. So let's duplicate this here and run this. Yeah, I would say payment API key, but the thing is, like, there's no guarantee that every payment gateway is going to work this way anyways. So it feels like I'm trying to be generic when really, you know, it's, if Braintree works in a totally different way where this design doesn't even work, then I just made it a generic name without any real benefit. It's kind of like pretending to be more generic than it really is, maybe. But you know what? I don't know. It's probably fine. Let's say, you know what? Let's go with Stripe API key because I'm going to change this eventually to use Stripe Connect, where we won't even be storing this. So let's not stress about that too much. Okay, so that test is green. We still got errors. These are probably related to model factory stuff. So let's head over to our model factory, and where we create the sponsorable, let's make sure that we provide a Stripe API key by default. So let's say test API key. Let's call it example API key, just so that it's different than the other things, so we don't have anything passing when it shouldn't be. Integrity constraint violation on the sponsorable itself. So let's look at the sponsorable test. Okay, so here you can see we're creating a sponsorable here. So let's make sure that we pass through a Stripe API key here as well. We'll say test API key, and okay. Okay, so now the problem is we got to basically update a bunch of stuff. So 2 ways I can think to solve this problem. We have a bunch of tests in the purchase sponsorship tests file, like email is required, where we check to make sure that no charges were made. So we could either go and update all of these to be like charges for a specific account ID, or I think what is maybe more useful is to just add another method to the fake payment gateway that gives us a flattened list of all the charges, so we can get all of them at once if needed. So let's write a new test for that, where we'll just say retrieving all charges. So this will basically go back to what we had before, where we just say like charges equals charges. We'll assert that that's 3. We can get rid of this here. We can change all these. Nope. These 6 to be charges. And these 3 like that. And this is going to fail because there's no charges method. So now if we go to the fake payment gateway, let's add a charges. And here we'll just return this charges flatten. Something like that. Okay, so we're back to green. Cool. We could insert no charges to the payment gateway, but I don't know a good way to test assertions, and I kind of like having tests for the fake. Yeah, so at this point, one thing that actually I want to be able to do, artisan migrate fresh. This is something that I kind of want to bake into my test suite, is make sure that my seeders still run. Because I think we'll see that this, oh, it doesn't fail. Interesting. Let's look at SQL Pro for a sec. I'm kind of curious what happens with, oh yeah, we just get example API key. Okay, so I guess that's fine. Well, that's good to know that the seeders still run. Okay, cool. So that gives us, puts us in a pretty good spot there. So let's just say, this is a lot of changes, but basically we just want to say, charge, or basically, what do we want to say? Like something like pay, correct account when completing a purchase. That's basically what we did. Okay, so that's cool. Everything still runs. Just to double check our sanity here, it looks like the browser still opens and stuff, so that's cool. Everything still seems okay here. There's one other thing that we should do, which basically we need to make sure that this payment token is being generated using the right public key. So we also need to update some code to pass that down through Stripe. So I'll show you what I mean. If you head over to if you look at our new sponsorship page component, it has a pay button component, right? And the pay button component has a complete purchase modal component, and the complete purchase modal component has a Stripe elements component, and the Stripe elements component currently has a hard-coded public key, which is obviously not ideal. In a perfect world, basically we want to have like a Stripe public key prop or something, right? And then in mounted, we would use this .stripe public key. Now, if we do like our build here, cd sponsorship yarn run watch, we'll probably just get like a bizarro error, or maybe just silently everything will work. Yeah, see, API key should be a string. I've never used run last test method. Is that even a thing? I don't even have that. I don't know. This is like my own plugin. I just run the whole suite by just jumping up here or going over the file. I don't know. Seems fast enough for me. Okay, so let's make sure that we can feed this through until we get rid of these errors here. So complete purchase modal, we're going to want to pass that through to Stripe elements here. So let's make sure we pass through the Stripe public key, and we'll just have that equal to Stripe public key and assume that the whole thing is going to get like fed all the way down, right? So complete purchase modal is going to need to accept that as a prop too. So this is kind of like a good example of what they call prop drilling in React. We have a prop that's coming down all the way from like the top level, and you have to feed it through every single component, which can be kind of annoying. But I don't think there's anything like inherently wrong with it. But you could refactor it to use like views, provide, inject stuff if you want. So new sponsorship, This is also going to need like the stripe public key to use. And we're going to want to pass that through to the pay button. Okay, so now we're still going to have an error here because we're not actually passing that prop in. So if we head over to the sponsorships new Blade page here, you'll see we're passing the sponsorable slots. Hey, maybe there's another way that we could do this. We could get the key directly from the sponsorable, but let's just do it this way for now, and we can refactor to that another time if we want. So here we'll just pass through the sponsorable, and then basically we want to be able to get like the stripe public key. And this isn't going to work still. Unexpected token. What have I done? Okay, because it's coming through as like an empty string. So to get this to work, we're going to want to make sure that we're passing through like a real stripe public key, right? So let's go to the create sponsorships or sponsораbles table. And we'll add the stripe API key, and we'll also have a stripe public key. Eventually we won't have to do this once we get like Stripe Connect properly set up, because we can use like our own public key, which can be like an environment variable. But for this MVP version, this is how we're going to have to do it. So we have some like necessary evil ugly code for now. So we'll set that up. That's going to cause our tests to fail, right? So let's go to our model factory and make sure that we pass one through. So Stripe public key. We'll just say example public key. That should get our tests almost passing. Oh yeah, there's a sponsorable test that doesn't rely on the factory. So this will be stripe public key, test public key. Run this again. Okay, so now we're green. We need to update our seeders though. If we go artisan, migrate. Actually, we don't need to update the seeders technically, but we will see that when we refresh this now, we still get an error because like something's messed up with the Stripe API key. Although property or method example public key is not defined on the instance. Oh, you know what the problem is there? If you look at this, we actually need to make sure that we don't bind this as JavaScript. Oh no, not that one. This one. We want this to be a string. Okay. Okay, so that seems okay. Although if we look at the view DevTools, I bet you will see that, see the stripe public key is like example public key. It's not really going to work when we actually try to do that stripe stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this test token, and I'm going to use this test token in our database seeder for now. So where we create this, let's do stripe public key, and we'll just hard code this in. Eventually it won't have to be there. So tests still pass. Hopefully we can still migrate the database in a fresh way. Looks like we can. And looks like things in the browser load up without errors. And if we go ahead and try to purchase, right? So we can say like fake company. We can say Adam at fake company dot, well, I'll say example.com. Put in a bunch of stuff. We're not going to be storing the stripe keys long term. And I don't even think that there's any real security problems there anyways. We're using revocable keys, so someone can go and revoke that key if they want. And if someone has access to the database, then you know, there's other things that we have to worry about. If we wanted to, we could encrypt that value because we don't have to query by it. So we could encrypt it, but the odds are if someone has access to the database, they probably have access to the encryption key too. So, you know, can't really win there. So let's check this out. It looks like a sponsorship was created for the right amount. These 2 slots were sponsored. If we refresh, those 2 slots are gone. So yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. So we didn't get to actually work on the Stripe thing today like I thought we would, but I think we're in a good spot now where we have enough of the APIs sorted out, and it's in terms of how things have to interact with the payment gateway, that when we actually go to build the Stripe one, we actually have enough stuff there for it to actually work. Before, if we had just tried to build out the Stripe implementation, we would have realized pretty quickly, oh shit, we need to make sure that we have the user's API key, we need to set the public key, blah, blah, blah. So now we're in a good spot to actually start on that. So maybe tomorrow or Friday, I'll do another stream, and that's when we can actually drive out the Stripe thing. And then once that's working, we should be able to actually see charges coming into Stripe and stuff like that. There's some other nitpicky things that we can do after that. Like we still got to do like the client side error handling. So like if someone leaves this stuff empty or whatever, like you can see it just stays processing. So we got work to do here. There's also if someone purchases these two, right now what happens is you just get like a thank you and that screen stays there, and they can click away and still see it and stuff. Like it seems kind of weird. Seems like maybe there should be a refresh, or maybe we should just like redirect them to a separate thank you page so we don't have lingering state. But yeah, stuff that we can figure out down the road. So yeah, thanks for checking out this stream. Hopefully you picked up a trick or two, and I'll see you tomorrow or Friday for another one. See you, everyone.